Hello and welcome to Let's Pod This. My name is Andy Moore. So glad to be with you again. Folks, we made it to February. Holy cow, we made it past January. Finally, I can't believe it took that long. That month was forever. As literally every meme I've seen in the last 2 weeks has said. It was a very, very long month. February, short month, always feels long. That's the way it goes. Whatever this warmth is we're having, this is fall, spring. Everyone know it's going to get cold again. Something will surprise us this month. Speaking of surprises, well, we gavelled into a special session this Monday, and for all intents and purposes, that special session is done. The Senate very publicly said they have no appetite for discussing tax cuts until the Board of Equalization meets on February 15th, I believe, to tell the legislature exactly how much money they have to spend this year, how much money they have to appropriate. So we'll see what happens there. I think you and I both know the governor called a special session largely for the headlines, right? So he can say he did it. He can say that the legislature wouldn't do it. And that next week on Monday, this coming Monday, February 5th, when the governor gives his annual State of the State address, he can hit it one more time. He wants to provide tax relief to Oklahomans. That actual tax relief, of course, is only a tiny, tiny, tiny amount, just pennies, literally pennies per day. For most Oklahomans, it would average only about $3 a month, which is insignificant, right? None of us would notice $3 a month in our paychecks. That's ridiculous. No one's going to miss $34 a year. Who will miss it, though, of course, is the rich people, right? Who stand to gain a couple of $1,000s a year. If you make, upwards of $500,000 a year, you're going to get several $1,000s in tax benefit here. I think we see where the tax relief is actually going. Anyway, as I said, the governor will give his State of the State address on Monday, and we will, of course, discuss it next week here on the program. We've got a good guest next week to talk about it with. We may even do a special episode. Who knows? We'll see how energetic I'm feeling next week, how hilarious, offensive, encouraging, whatever the State of the State might be. And, of course, the actual governing that will be happening. I expect my inbox will be full of press releases all week from the legislature. Man, those folks really know how to send out a lot of press releases. Before we get there, though, before we get into the chaos, the hullabaloo of the legislative session, today we have a very special guest in studio. My guest today is Reverend Dr. Shannon Fleck from the Oklahoma Faith Network. Welcome to the show, Shannon.
Thank you, Andy.
I'm so excited you're here. You office down the hall, and I don't think we've ever had you on the program before.
I know, and I'm only mildly offended by that.
Well, good. Well, we'll try to remedy that before you become medium offended.
Okay.
And maybe make this a regular occurrence. But I'm so glad you're here. You and I have worked in similar circles for a number of years, and I'm sure that a number of our listeners already know you well. But for those who don't, let's start by talking about you. I introduced you with two titles, Reverend and Doctor.
Right.
I'm certain there's a story with at least one of those that's worth sharing. Tell us a little bit about yourself, and I think we want to know, like, how did you end up here? How did you come to this work? Because this is, I assume, probably not what you set out to do when you were in college.
So weird, right? Like the story is funny in that I'm a native Oklahoman. I grew up in Guthrie, which is now becoming such a bigger town,
sure,
right? It's grown, but when I grew up there, it was small town. And I graduated with my undergraduate degree in sociology and went home to Guthrie, America, and got a job as a juvenile probation officer, of all things.
Where did you go to college?
I went to UCO in Edmond.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So going home is like 15 minutes north.
15 minutes, yeah. I went so far away. No, I was literally 15 minutes from home, but went back to Guthrie, and people are shocked to hear that was my first job because, that's not necessarily a normal straight out of college experience.
Well, and they probably don't associate juvenile workers of criminal workers with anyone who's female, or like there's a preconceived notion there.
Absolutely. Yes. And so people are shocked by that. But it really just shaped my entire life in the best of ways, because I went into that job as a 22-year-old who had grown up in this tiny town, essentially in a bubble. And I credit my mother with that. She obviously raised me with great values and awareness, to the point, though, that I didn't know there was pain, hurt, abuse, and terrible things in the world. So coming into that job, it blew my mind that such things existed.
Right.
And it lit this fire within me that, okay, so whatever I do for the rest of my life, I cannot ignore pain, hurt, and unrest in this world. I don't know what that will look like. And it took on some iterations, Andy.
Sure.
I applied to go into the Peace Corps and was accepted to go to the Peace Corps. And at the last minute was like, I just don't know if going to Thailand for 2 years is the gig. I don't know if that's it. And I got way in the process.
Yeah.
And
that's why there's a process too,
that's,
right?
Yes.
To give young adults the chance to really think through this decision.
Correct. And I'm grateful that I was thinking outside of the box, but I also know now reflectively that was the correct decision not to do that. And then it became, I'm going to go get a master's of social work degree. And I was accepted and was going to start at OU, was very excited. That was the route. Well, while I was doing juvenile probation, I was also volunteering as a youth minister at my home congregation in Guthrie, and did that just for free until they hired someone. Well, I did that for 2 years for free. They never hired anybody.
But they loved you.
They did, and I loved them. And the associate minister at the time was the first female minister I'd ever seen in my life.
Can I ask what denomination?
Disciples of Christ.
Okay.
So if you see the red cup on signs affiliated with Christian churches, that's us.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
The red chalice.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I was picturing the red cup like the coffee shop over on Classen, which is a coffee mug that's red, not the chalice. This makes more sense. I have seen that.
I would fully claim the red cup also, though, as a denominational
We've got
experience.
Christ and vegan biscuits. Or
That's
whatever.
right.
Yeah.
Right on. So Disciples of Christ, lifelong. And she was the first female I had seen. And really, I didn't realize until then that until you see something, you don't realize that it's possible.
Oh, sure.
So I grew up not thinking that ministry was ever
Right.
in the field of possibility for me as a woman.
And for a lot of denominations, even in the Christian church, it's not.
Correct.
Like that's a relatively new shift, I think, for a lot of denominations.
It's very slow. The denominations who have embraced it have done so very well, but even in more conservative parts of the country, like Oklahoma, there's still a hesitancy in denominations to hire women, even within the denominations that ordain women. So that was interesting.
Oh, that's interesting. So there's denominations that might ordain women, but not ever actually hire them.
Yeah, 100%.
We'll let you get so close and not come in the room. Right.
That's right. And if you talk to women in seminary, that's a common experience. So the associate pastor said to me, "Have you ever considered seminary?" And I laughed at her, because who would ever think about intentionally going into ministry like that? And she gave me a packet of information from Phillips Theological Seminary in Tulsa, and I threw it in my back seat to be forgotten in the pile of whatever existed in my back seat at the age of 24. And I forgot about it, but it planted a seed in me, and that seed did not go away. If anything, it got so big I couldn't ignore it. And I finally let her take me up to Tulsa for a visit at the seminary. And I sat in on a class and just knew that was it. That was the gig. I had no idea what my life would look like. I had no idea what kind of job that would get me in the future. I knew it was going to be a hard road, but boy, did I know that was my educational experience.
How fascinating. It's different, but I remember when I was in high school preparing to go to college, and I came for like a, high school college days thing weekend, and you had to sit in on a class. And I remember sitting there and like seeing all these, college students come in their hoodies, and they were coming in 2 minutes late or 5 minutes late and just sitting down. And it just felt so grown up. And grad school is kind of the same thing, just like another layer higher, where something about it, even if you hate going to class, suddenly seeing this other class feels exciting.
Absolutely. It was emotional. It was an emotional experience. And that was in like July.
Okay.
So I was scheduled to start the MSW program at OU a month later.
Oh.
So within a month, I withdrew from OU. They thought I had lost my mind, literally. And I had applied, been accepted, and enrolled at Phillips Seminary. It was that quick.
Only in a seminary can you make a decision that quickly and still get in to start the semester.
Correct. They were ready to have me. And it was an 89 credit hour master's degree. I think a lot of people don't realize that. A Master's of Divinity degree is basically equivalent with attending law school.
Right.
Except we only get a master's out of it.
Right.
It's called a Master's of Divinity. And that is for my denomination, along with a lot of mainline Christian denominations, you have to have a Master's of Divinity to be considered for ordination. However, just getting the Master's of Divinity doesn't guarantee ordination. They are two separate processes.
Sure. It's like having to pass boards after
That's right.
medical school or something.
Exactly.
And just for reference, like my master's in counseling is a 60-hour program. You said that was an 89-hour program, so 50% longer than my master's in counseling. And my MBA, I think, was a 48-hour program, so almost twice as long as that, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
It's a big program, and a lot of people are surprised by that. And so just putting that out there, that it's not a small hoop to jump through.
It's a big commitment.
It's a big commitment. And if you do it full time and nothing else, you can get it done in 3 years, like law school.
Right. But that's full time cranking it out. Yeah.
I had bills to pay. So I worked, 3/4 time as a youth pastor while I went to seminary. So it took me 4 years.
Presumably driving from Guthrie to Tulsa for classes?
Yes. So I lived in Guthrie. I would drive to Tulsa. Oh my gosh, the days were just, I don't know how I did it. I would wake up at 5 to be on the road by 6, to be in class by 8 a.m. And then I'd take 3-hour-long classes throughout the day at the seminary. I'd get done at 9 p.m., drive home, get home around 11 p.m., and that was the day.
Right, go straight to bed.
Straight to bed.
Yeah.
I don't know how I survived that.
Oh, to be young again.
Oh, to be young, right? So I graduated with my MDiv in May of 2011 and was ordained immediately. I was lucky enough that my denomination granted me that. And so I've been ordained for a minute now.
Yeah, congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. So that's the Reverend in my title.
Okay. I forgot there's another chapter to this already.
The chapters.
So it sounds like the academic side didn't go away entirely.
It did not. I didn't necessarily think I would go on for the doctorate, but what I and a lot of women in ministry experience is that often we need a little bit extra to be taken seriously. And that's just part of the gig.
I find that in other fields as well. I can think of nursing in particular. I know a lot of folks who were, went to graduate school to become a nurse practitioner and then decided to do their doctorate of nursing as well because they're like, oh, well, it's only a couple more years. And in a profession where they are already having to kind of fight for elbow room with PAs and physicians, they've needed or felt like they needed something else to boost that up.
It absolutely felt like that, especially once I came into this role. I really felt like I needed to prove myself academically as well.
This role with the Faith Network? Okay,
yeah.
so there was a gap between
Yes.
seminary and going back for that. Is it a doctorate in divinity?
Ministry. It's
In
a
ministry,
doctor
okay.
of ministry.
I guess every seminary probably has their own thing there.
They do, and there's different higher
Sure.
level, there's different programs. So in 2018, the fall of 2018, I began my Doctor of Ministry program at Emory University in Atlanta. And it was a hybrid program, and I would have to go in person twice a year for about, a week. And then we would have online class. So we were already using Zoom pre-pandemic.
Before it was cool, yeah.
Yeah, and then in the middle of my doctoral program, COVID hit.
Oh,
And that really shaped the tail end of my doctoral program in an interesting way, because we had to, in real time, learn and navigate how to do ministry in a whole new world.
right.
And we were doing it professionally in this program, in our settings. And in addition to that, I had a first grader at home.
Right.
And
Who also is having to learn virtually. Yeah.
yeah, and she couldn't read, so
Right.
she can't do school on her own while I work. It was
Yeah.
intense there for a minute, but exactly 10 years after I graduated with my MDiv, I graduated with my Doctor of Ministry.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you. So in May of 2021, I became Reverend Dr. Shannon Fleck.
Excellent.
And yeah, I found my way to what is now the Oklahoma Faith Network by way of being an associate minister in Enid, Oklahoma for a couple of years.
Okay, so kind of just to make sure that the timeline is straight
Correct.
in my head.
Yep.
So you got your MDiv. You were presumably after you graduated, I assume, got another job at some point that maybe perhaps actually paid beyond the youth ministry work you were doing as a volunteer. Was that job in Enid then?
No, I got to Enid in 2015.
Okay.
At the time, I was married to a man who is active duty Air Force.
Okay.
So that took me to Abilene, Texas for a few years, Little Rock, Arkansas for a few years, and then we ended up in Enid. And I was able to get a job at a church in Enid because people in Oklahoma knew me. So it was easier, right, than trying to prove myself in these new states.
Sure.
And after I did that for a couple of years, I had a big life transition and no longer married. And an opportunity came up with this organization that was called at the time the Oklahoma Conference of Churches.
Yeah. So can you tell us a little bit about the organization and its
Yeah.
origin and how it got started?
Absolutely. The Oklahoma Conference of Churches was founded in 1972 to be an ecumenical Christian organization. The goal was to create and implement dialogue across denominations, but strictly only Christian. That's what the word ecumenical means. It's a Christian word for Presbyterians working with Methodists and disciples, like we're cross-talking, right? And that was a big movement
Right.
at the time.
Trying to bring together what is honestly like a pretty disparate faith, right? The Christian faith is very spread out.
Very.
And was the work of the Conference of Churches just with like Protestant leaning churches, or did it like include Catholics and Orthodox and kind of all the other groups?
Yes, the Catholic diocese was involved from the beginning, and there was, I think, one Orthodox denomination that was a part of it at one time. I came on board as the director of programs, essentially program development strategy, in 2017. So I did not come on in the role I'm in now. I came in a different role, and my predecessor retired like 9 months in. And I don't know what made me like have the audacity, but I applied and they were like, go for it.
Yeah.
And I said, okay, like, here we go. So I became the executive director of what was then the Oklahoma Conference of Churches in 2018.
That's so interesting. I had no idea about the timeline. I don't remember when you and I first met, but this all makes sense because, Let's Fix This started in the spring of 2016. And certainly, I think after the 2016 election, there was a lot of groups around the country that sprang up kind of in the wake of that election. We were ahead of that. It was not tied to the election, just to be just to be clear.
Right.
But there's a lot of people that I know, right, that we all kind of got thrust into this arena around the same time. And there was a lot of issues in our state that were coming up that I think brought people together. 2018 was the teacher walkout too, right? Or was that 2019?
I feel like that was the next year.
It all runs
Oh,
together.
actually, maybe it was 2018.
It was.
Yes, because I was the acting executive director.
That's right.
Didn't quite have the gig just yet,
That's
but
right.
yes,
I remember
it
being
was.
at the Capitol.
Correct.
There was I don't know if it was Wednesday of that week, of the walkout week, where in the morning there was like a big prayer service kind of in the fourth floor rotunda where you had faith leaders. I remember you
I was there.
being there, and I was there with my son because he obviously didn't have school.
Right.
And my son's aunt is a minister who I think you know. And so she was there with him, and I was like, oh, this is great timing that we're all here. And that was probably, if I was going to trace it back, that might have been the first time that you and I met, but we kind of knew of each other because of some overlap in the work. So.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay.
Interesting. In the before times, anything
In the before.
anything before 2020 is real blurry.
It's like a different world.
It is.
Completely different.
Yeah.
So at that point, OCC had already been engaging in more interfaith work for about 10 years and was having membership from a variety of faith traditions, not just Christian anymore. And as I was coming into the leadership, I knew pretty early on that a rebrand was probably in order.
Because of that.
Yeah, the 1972 ecumenical mission was good. We expanded that mission over time very naturally, but our name was still reflecting that old functionality. So in 2022, we made the announcement that we were changing our name to the Oklahoma Faith Network. And we have been living into this new rebrand of what our mission really is, which is to connect, motivate, and empower communities of faith in Oklahoma. And that's communities of all faiths, not just Christian.
And so essentially the Oklahoma Faith Network is a membership organization of church bodies of some kind, or representative of different faith traditions, as you said. Do you have any idea of the number of participating churches or denominations, or however you categorize that?
Sure. 15 Christian denominations, and I would put maybe the local congregations within those umbrellas at about 1,500.
Sure, yeah. Each of those denominations represent
a lot.
A ton, yeah.
Yeah. But then we also have engaging relationships with multi-faith, bodies and interfaith engagement. And more secular organizations are becoming members and engaged of the work because they are seeing the movements of faith-based narratives that are being put out in the public sphere. They want to be engaged in a voice that's saying something different. And so,
when you said faith-based, you gave air quotes to me here in the studio.
Oh, yeah.
Now, so you tell me more about that. You said faith-based with air quotes to imply that there are, I guess, maybe people in the public realm that are using faith as a guise for something else.
Exactly. Faith-based is an interesting term because it kind of lumps in a lot, and not just local congregations, which is what most people think of.
Right.
People think of that we only work with a local church, but the truth is we work with secular organizations to help them work with faith communities.
Right.
We help faith communities connect with trauma-informed trainings, and we're really trying to uplift and empower the faith movement, or people that are utilizing faith as a tool in a toolbox.
Right.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. It makes total sense. I mean, we, just as a personal example, right? Let's Fix This is a, quote, secular organization because we are not faith-based. And I think to your point, there's a lot of, we'll say, faith-flavored organizations, but they're not based. That's a different, it's the difference between like a chicken soup or like a chicken scented candle or something that's like
Ew.
wafted around. That does sound disgusting. Maybe that's not a bad, I don't know.
That might be someone's flavor, though. So I'm not going to diss that.
But a separate organization that I work with nationally is makes me think about this. It's they're called the Mormon Women for Ethical Government, and so they're a national organization. They've got chapters in, I think, 49 of the 50 states that are pretty active, or members in 49 of the states, and chapters in a bunch of them, and they share a commonality there that it's primarily Mormon women, but they do a lot of work with good government, like pro-democracy, bridge-building communities, and they are bringing their network into that work, and they are bringing that work to their network, right? So like when I work with them, we talk about electoral and democracy reform, and they are curious about how can we strengthen democracy. They have volunteers that want to get involved, who need to know more about it, and we want to educate them and to provide the opportunity for them to get involved, because on some level, like, we're all in this together. Like, we may not, even if we don't share the faith piece, like, I'm not a Mormon nor a woman, but we all care about democracy together, and we can find ways to work together in the same way that there are Black-led organizations or Latino-led organizations or LGBTQ-led organizations. Having a faith-led organization is an important part of that pie.
Absolutely. And that's the way to think of it. Is it's a pie. We all have our sectors, but we all form the pie. And really, when we isolate ourselves from one another, we're not doing justice to the work that can be done.
Fascinating. So today, Oklahoma Faith Network, I know you have a few employees here, and because we office in the same building, so I get to talk to you guys. What kind of programming do you provide or offer right now?
Oh, gosh. Oh, well, in 2020, we started a campaign called No Hate in the Heartland, and that's something that's near and dear to me. It's centered around anti-racism, anti-discrimination work, and absolutely something that the faith sector needs to be engaged in. So we made that a more active part of our platform in 2020. So we do a lot of panel discussions, information sessions, all kinds of advocacy work around this mission of No Hate in the Heartland. In addition to that, we have beautiful partnerships that allow us to do trauma-informed work within communities. So we do work around addiction prevention, specifically around the opioid epidemic, and getting congregations and faith-based communities to engage in that conversation, really trying to strip away shame is really at the core of that work, because addiction is something people live with in the shadows, and people in pews of congregations, no matter the faith tradition, are struggling with addiction.
Sure.
And we want to empower faith leaders to be engaged in that dialogue, to strip that shame away from folks so that healing can really take place. And, we really just want to bring that out of the shadows and care for people. In addition, we work with a program called Strengthening Families that we partner with local congregations, and we train local leaders to do this program in their local setting with their local community. And we give them funding to do that. We pay them for their time to lead that. And it's one of the most beautiful programs that we've ever seen. We just had a graduation ceremony 2 nights ago, graduated 12 families in Tulsa. Beautiful, beautiful. I cry every time. Additionally, we are engaging in work in suicide prevention now.
Oh, you guys recently did a mental health first aid training for your staff too, right?
Yeah, we did mental health first aid here in the office. Great day. We're doing a variety of trainings right now so that we can then offer them statewide in faith communities. So the first step of that is we need to get trained.
Sure.
We need to know what we're doing. And so we're learning a lot. We're experiencing a lot of different trainings, models, curriculums to really bring that and experience it. What we did in the fall is we launched a survey, because what you'll learn in doing faith-based work, if ever you're interested, is that there's not a lot of data when it comes to faith-based work in general.
Yeah.
So we launched a survey in the fall to try and learn and get a more comprehensive picture of what the faith relationship is with suicide and suicide prevention. What are the conversations like? What do you believe about suicide from your faith tradition, and why?
Yeah.
What kind of training have you had or not had? And what we are seeing in those results is that a vast majority of our people of faith in Oklahoma know someone who has died by suicide, know about suicide, but have never had access to training with regards to it.
Yeah, woefully inequipped to know how to respond.
Absolutely. So we are on the front end of really starting to engage that work.
That's so fascinating. I'm so grateful that Oklahoma Faith Network exists for many reasons, but those in particular. Two of the things you just mentioned, addictions and then suicide, or as someone with a background in the mental health field, is certainly near and dear to my heart in those ways, and as someone who has friends and family who suffer from those things. And I remember when I was in middle school, I this, but I went to school to be a minister as well.
I do know that.
Yeah, but after a few months, I was like, this is not the path for me. And but I remember in middle school talking to our pastor. We are a small church. We were friends with their family. Plus, he's the pastor. I guess it's his job to chat. Anyway, I don't know how it came up, but his wife made a comment that she had found some kind of drugs in his sock drawer, and she was like, "What's this?" And he was like, "Oh, I got it from a parishioner or someone in the church." And he said, "I get more good drugs in this job because," and I was probably 14 and what? And he said, people will come to his office to talk to him "Pastor, I'm struggling with this drug. I need you to take it," and would just give them the drugs. And he didn't know what to do with them, right? And this is in the mid-90s. And so he just would put them in his desk drawer or in his pocket and take it home. It happened at weird times. Some of it, he just put it in his sock drawer to get rid of it when he was changing clothes or something. And before he went to the hospital to minister to someone there. And I was just thinking what a bizarre job where you think you're going to be a clergy because you're going to preach on Sundays and tell people about, God or salvation or whatever. And you end up having to pocket an 8-ball of Coke because someone catches you in the parking lot or whatever.
That
was not part of that's other duties as needed or whatever on the job description. We
classify that as things they don't teach you in seminary.
Right.
And there's a whole heap of that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But, and I think, suicide and any kind of mental health thing comes along with that, where I know a lot of pastors who would do premarital counseling and did great, as well, on the presumption that the couple will come in, we'll read this book, and kumbaya, they're going to get married, they're in love. But the moment that they hit rocky waters, it's a real big issue. And when I was when I had my private practice of counseling, I did mostly couples, and I had a lot of couples who came to me referred by their minister, who thankfully said, "This is out of my depth."
Thankfully,
yeah. There's a lot that
do not
think, "Oh, I got this."
Yeah,
but there are more resources. There's bigger answers than just pray about it or whatever.
Yes,
and getting faith communities trained, not just aware of, but actually trained and building skills in how to respond to people's needs in these areas.
Exactly.
Is very important.
We would ensure that your pastor had disposal bags in his office.
Right. Don't just flush it in the toilet.
Yeah, please don't take that 8-ball to your sock drawer in your home.
Right.
So that's exactly the kind of work. And, pastors, we don't learn this stuff. Seminary does not hand us mental health training. It does not hand us how to deal with addiction. It doesn't give us those things. But what we find is that our faith leaders are on the front end of so much human care in our communities. And we have to be in the work of instilling skill sets that we were not trained to have formally.
Yeah, and I love the phrase "human care" first of all, and if I think there's a lot of pressure on members of the clergy, right? An expectation that they do have all the answers,
and
so to admit that you don't have the answers or the knowledge of some things is, I think, difficult for a lot of people. And so having a trusted resource that is from the faith community, like you're learning from someone you already feel safe with because of who you are, who the organization is like 1 degree closer than having to go out and find that resource somewhere else, right?
Correct.
Like, even if you might know that you can go get a suicide prevention training from a community mental health center or the Department of Mental Health or something, you might not, because like that's far away and like scary, or it's just like one more burden. But to have a faith-based organization come and say, hey, we're offering this training, we're one of you, come be with us,
right, makes
it more accessible.
Sure. And we can include your theological practice in the dialogue.
Sure.
Because we speak that language.
Right. Yeah. Which is helpful.
I think so.
So OFN also engages in some advocacy, which you mentioned. And as we all know, the second regular session of the 59th legislature starts next week, right? It starts on Monday. And I am certain that there are some bills that I have seen filed. Some have been in the news. Some I've just seen as I'm perusing the catalog. What are you watching, Shannon? Are there certain things that you guys have on your radar?
Absolutely. There's a lot this year, actually. We normally see a lot of, I would say, preaching from the House floor.
There's a number of ministers who serve in the state legislature.
And it's okay. I would love to know more about these ministers that are in our legislature, specifically around their theological education, because some of what's said is wow. But
I would suspect, Shannon, that the rigor that you went through with your studies might not be the same for everyone out there.
Listen, let me tell, a lot of people don't know this or understand this, but ordination is not unilateral, right? You can go online and be ordained in an hour.
I did that. I am one of those. I did it. So I could officiate a wedding.
Reverend Andy Moore, ladies and gentlemen.
That's right. Yeah, from the Holy Church of the Internet or whatever it is.
That's right. Well, guess what, Andy Moore, Reverend Andy Moore? According to a bill being introduced this session, you could get a job in place of a school counselor in a local public school.
This offends me as a counselor.
It should.
Not as a member of the clergy.
It should.
But that's wild. So it's a legislation that, first of all, we don't have enough school counselors to go around, right? Like I have a couple of good friends that are school counselors, and they are spread thin amongst multiple schools. So they get like 1 day at each school or half a day at each school during the week and have to just rotate around, which is, if you're only at a school for 4 hours once a week, there's a whole lot of kids not being served.
Absolutely. Yes. And it's a problem.
So we know there's a need.
There is a need.
And this bill seeks to fill that need, but not with counselors, but with members of the clergy.
Correct. And it's not just one bill. There's actually 4 bills.
Oh, of course. Well,
there are 4 versions.
If one's good, Shannon, 4's
Let's up the ante. Let's write it 4 times, different ways. So,
are these bills, like, is it open to members of any faith tradition? I assume not.
The one I have read is from Shane Jett, and the language is very vague, as it tends to be, and essentially says a minister with authorization in their church, their tradition.
So the Internet Church counts.
I mean, it doesn't say it doesn't.
Universal Life Church or whatever it was.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the first question there is, okay, all ordination is not created equal.
Right.
Authorization from a faith body is not equal. It's not unilateral. You're not necessarily going to get someone who went to seminary for 4 years. And let me also just reiterate what I just said a minute ago. We didn't get mental health
Right.
education. We didn't get any of that. So this bill resembles one that we saw in Texas that seeks to allow chaplains to come into our public school systems in the place of school counselors. And while I fully understand that we are struggling with school counselors, the alarming nature of, you can get ordained on the internet. Some denominations, all you really need to do is express your call to ministry and you are granted ordination.
Oh, right. So
without a formal education.
God told me to be a minister.
Correct.
Sure. So, I mean, it's not to be simplistic about this, but we know that we need the thing that our schools need, right? Are more trained, certified teachers and more school counselors. And what it seems like we're filling those needs with are police officers and ill-trained ministers.
Right.
And as you said, even a well-trained minister might not be a well-trained counselor.
Well,
because
let
a
me
different
just
skill set.
say that I have a master's and a doctorate, and I am not at all qualified to do that job. I will say that publicly all day long. I am not qualified to be a school counselor at all.
Right.
And to think that there are religious leaders who will go into our public schools without a religious agenda is ignoring a very big red flag.
Right. And this is about public schools, right? Like,
correct.
I assume a Catholic school might have
sure,
some kind of faith element, right? Makes sense.
Absolutely.
But this is not, in the same way, I would imagine most churches would not want a counselor to come in and fill the role of a pastor without some kind of training.
Right. Exactly.
Or, I'm no heart surgeon, but in a pinch, I could be emergency certified. No, that's not okay.
That's not the way that works. Right. Yeah. So that's one that's really alarming. Actually, that's 4 that's really alarming. And I have a lot of concerns, as would, I think, a lot of Oklahomans have concerns about that one, as we should. It's a real problem that needs a solution. This isn't it.
Right.
This is not the solution.
All right. So ministers instead of counselors, that's
correct.
One concern.
We are seeing, again, we want the 10 Commandments posted in every classroom.
Isn't that settled law?
I feel like it should be settled law, Andy. Didn't we have the 10 Commandments on the Capitol grounds that had to get removed? And they're bringing that one up again, by the way.
I saw that.
That one's coming back. They want to put that back up.
As a historical document.
Historical document. Yeah.
Which has already been, we've already fought this in court. The state spent a lot of money to defend it. They lost by the state Supreme Court. That same monument is now down the street, right, at a private organization's property. That was when I first started paying attention to Oklahoma politics. And I remember the video, the live feed of them removing this thing under it was at night. There was like a helicopter filming it.
Yes.
Awkward shadows were being it was real. It just felt comical. And I think we're going to get into this, I know, but like the separation of church and state is feels narrower and narrower, or that people are trying to push them closer together
on purpose. This is a concerted effort to insert religion into public spaces. It's intentional. This eroding of the separation of church and state is a very intentional act. We're seeing it across the country. It's not just Oklahoma. However, Oklahoma's pushing it super hard because we've got the lawmakers willing to do it.
Right.
And we're in a big election year. So
Right. We always know there's going to be an inordinate number of, we'll say, outlandish bills that have maybe a low chance of passage, but not zero.
Not zero.
And these tend to be the stories that catch the eye of not just the local media, who usually, by and large, know better, but national media, who I think in some ways it confirms outsiders' beliefs about Oklahoma, which is
There's a lot of opinions that are made about Oklahoma based on some of this.
A few news stories, right?
Yeah, and it's unfortunate.
Right.
Right.
The Jeff Foxworthy used to have a bit about Southerners on TV and like the Southern accent is what he was talking about, and
Yeah.
like how we can't keep the most offensive among us off the TV, like when there's a tornado or whatever. And it was always like a caricature of someone from the South, and I was like, oh, that's what happens to us too.
Yes, absolutely,
Well,
absolutely.
Could we talk about white supremacy for a little bit?
Please.
This is not a topic that anyone likes to bring up, but I think we've kind of circled around it here, that there is an intersection that is not, I think we used to think it kind of existed and out there, but it was not as prevalent as we now know it is, right? That this comes up time and time again, particularly around public education.
Yes.
But also just in how government functions, right? And this separation of church and state is a good kind of a flashpoint where this comes up, that there are those among us in society who strongly believe that the Christian church is the only correctness, the only like right thing, right? That is the only thing that's true or good or morally fine or whatever.
Right.
And that it should be the overarching moral code for all Americans.
Right.
Period.
End of sentence. Right. Something that's really important to keep in mind, and I think specifically the country's attention got grabbed when Roe v. Wade was overturned, because the anti-choice movement was the first brainchild iteration of a very intentional Christian nationalist platform. And the Christian nationalist movement is white supremacy. It is very important not to separate those. And one of the core beliefs of Christian nationalism is centered in this notion called the doctrine of discovery. And the doctrine of discovery says, and when you hear it out of my mouth, you're going to hear it now all the time. It's this idea that America was gifted by God. God gave America to the colonists from Europe.
Right.
It's a gift. This land was a gift from the holy, just for us. Now, who does that narrative not work for?
Right. Literally everybody else.
Literally everybody else.
Particularly Native Americans who were already here.
Hello.
Right.
Yeah. Native Americans, the
Enslaved persons that we brought here against their will. Right.
all of the populations of people who have been discriminated against, hated, ostracized, belittled, killed over the millennia.
Right.
Like, there is no nostalgia for anyone that isn't white.
Right. Right.
And I think that's something that people have to remember, is this nostalgia for an old America only exists for white people.
Well, and so I have been reading a book called Democracy Awakens by Heather Cox Richardson, who some listeners may know. She's been doing like a weekly newsletter and I think some kind of webcast thing for several years now about really the history of American democracy. And this book really starts the first couple of chapters with this history of going back to trace white nationalism, right? So, and those, I feel like whenever we say the word white, then some people tune out because they're like, oh, it's like race baiting, or they're talking about it. Okay, well, let's just talk about nationalism, right? This American exceptionalism, this idea that America is somehow better, the best, gifted, above, set apart.
God bless America.
Right, that it's something about it that makes us better than every other country.
Correct.
And I grew up being fed that too. I mean, just from society, right? Yep. Songs like the one you just mentioned.
Absolutely.
And everything else. But when you start going back into history and like there's a very, very direct and obvious like line from, well, certainly from like slavery, like pre-Civil War America, right? That led to the Civil War.
Yes.
The South lost.
Yep.
Slavery was abolished, and they just kept at it. Like they kept working at it and working at it, and you get up into like the 30s and 40s, and the same group, right, just kept trying to ostracize the others. And really, the book is drawn a line not just about nationalism, but about like autocracy to fascism to this idea that like it's us and them. We are right. They are wrong. We are good. They are bad. Black and white, or white and black. And the way I'm telling the story, right? That like it just draws this line all the way through. And now here we are in the 2020s. And it's still happening.
Yeah, and add to that narrative Christianity.
Yes.
Because you layer Christianity into that and it becomes Christians are right, true, and correct. This belief system is the only way. And it's forgotten that Christianity is broad and not all Christians are in this camp. But the Christianity that I'm speaking of is very much based in this fear, control, and power mindset. And this is not new. When you look at Christian history across the span of documented history, it is a lot of people won't like this, but it's honest. It was created literally by committees of men.
Yeah.
Committees of men put the Bible together.
The Council of Nicaea was not inclusive.
No, it was men.
Right.
It was a group of men who took a group of writings from history and literally decided whether or not they were going to be in this book that became the Bible.
I remember when I was in college, this is probably why when I decided to leave that path was when I like realized, oh, they just pick these books? Because you kind of grow up assuming that like God put them on tablets and we just developed the printing press and wrote them. But no, they had a lot more writings and they're like, not these, only these. And we had to buy, a copy of the Bible that included the Apocrypha, which is like a bunch of books that they left out of the Bible, but you could still buy it with them in there. And it like changed the whole thing. And
but even that's not all of the books that were up for grabs.
I was like, this is all bananas.
Right. Yeah. So look at that and think about that. But a lot of the control pressure comes from the idea that these writings are the literal, true, handwritten words of God. And when that is the belief system, it's really hard to question, engage, and evolve. And the Bible itself is one of the most self-contradictory texts that exists because it was written by different authors with different agendas and different levels of education and different cultures. So here we are today in modern society trying to post 10 Commandments in public classrooms without ever really fully understanding the cultural context, history, and reason that was even written.
Right.
Because in the mindset of this particular belief system is that it's inerrant. It's not to be questioned or judged.
Right. Yes, the 10 Commandments, when written thousands of years ago, were very relevant to the Jews at the time as they were,
it was
to their culture and to their society, and it is very, very, very different now.
And isn't it funny? It's so funny to me that the focus is the 10 Commandments and not the Beatitudes.
Right. Oh yeah, wouldn't it be? This is a funny idea, right? Just for a thought exercise of like, what if they said, we want to post,
blessed are the poor.
Right. That's right. All of the Beatitudes in the classroom.
Yeah. They shall inherit the earth. That's not cool. That doesn't track with power and control.
Right.
That's love and acceptance. And that is scary.
Right.
Because you can't control love and acceptance. Love and acceptance is 9 times harder than fear.
Right.
And anger.
Right. Because the 10 Commandments are, and this is, I'm not trying to comment on
no.
faith histories themselves, but just as like honestly, just the grammatical content, right? Like the 10 Commandments are written in the imperative, right? Where they are instructions. Honor thy father and thy mother, right? Like it's telling you what to do. Whereas the Beatitudes are like statements of value.
Correct.
In some way.
Correct. And very universal value.
Yeah.
So, and it's not even about the context of the scripture. It's about the mindset of those who are wielding it. That's the point I'm making, is regardless of what scripture or the words say, it's how those in power today are utilizing those words towards an agenda. That's the part.
Right.
That is the part that is the conversation.
Right, because there's a reason that they're doing this.
Correct. And, throughout history, religion has been weaponized, multiple times. Wars, inquisitions, beheadings, name it. And so when you think about the history of the United States, to do so accurately would be to think of our founding fathers as not that far removed from, say, Spanish Inquisitions.
Right.
They had very real memories of the religious persecution of their ancestors over in Europe. So, of course, they put in the First Amendment that there will be no establishment of a national religion. And now we have people saying, oh, well, the separation of church and state is not in the Constitution. Okay, semantics.
Right.
The First Amendment has the Establishment Clause within its words that specifically says there will be no national religion.
Well, and it's also not in the Constitution because that is the essence of the Declaration of Independence,
Yep.
right? An enormous reason that the American colonists wanted to separate from England was because they did not like the establishment of the Church of England was, that's a whole other history that we can go into of why it was established, right?
And that's a fun one.
That's a fun one. That's a different podcast.
Yeah, it is.
But America saw what had happened over
That's
there and
right.
said, we don't want that. We don't want a king. We don't want a king who creates his own church.
Yep.
We don't want anyone to create like a church that we all have to follow. We want to do our own thing.
We want freedom.
Individually, right. We want freedom.
And isn't that amazing? Because freedom of religion is now being flipped on its head. We are seeing a bill from Julie Daniels coming to this session called the Freedom of Religious Expression Act. And within that bill, the words Judeo-Christian are used multiple times. So is it really freedom of religion? Because you're only talking about Judeo-Christian, and that's not freedom. That's
Right.
one religion.
Yeah, I think there is this like overarching narrative I'm sure it's always been there, but especially the last few years, that somehow the Christian faith is under attack. And I remember even kind of feeling this sentiment when I was in school, right? That like if the school didn't officially sanction and like host see you at the pole when kids would gather before school to pray on the flagpole, that like you were the First Amendment allows you to do that if you want. You can get the flagpole every day and pray
Every day.
with all your friends or whoever you want, but the school cannot mandate that you do that.
Yep.
Because the school as a government entity would be mandating that, and that would be forcing you to practice a religion that you may not adhere to, but you are still free to do so. There's some idea that like if the school doesn't say you have to, then they're saying you can't, and that is a false equivalency.
Completely.
Like not requiring prayer is not the same as banning prayer.
Exactly. But that whole notion you just mentioned, this fear, this Christianity is under attack, Christians are being persecuted, that is that fear and anger tactic that is so motivating. Because if we convince Christians that they are being discriminated against, not being tolerated, whatever, the anger and fear is going to motivate people towards action.
Right.
And when you tap into that, you can move stuff.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That fear and outrage are
Fear and outrage.
powerful motivators.
Absolutely.
And to be clear, in some pockets of the world, Christians are being persecuted.
To be clear, yes.
And in some pockets of the world, Muslims are being persecuted
Yep.
and Jews are being persecuted and
Yes.
like and Hindus and like everything.
all of it.
And what I think we should want as a country and what we should fight for as individuals and as a state, as a country, is for the freedom for all people to practice their religion however they want to. If you ain't hurt anybody, knock yourself out.
It's important to remember that the freedom of religion is the freedom to practice your religion, but it's also the freedom from religion.
Right.
And that's the part that gets just kind of ignored. It's like you have the right to practice whatever you want, right up to the point that it affects my right to live and practice as I want. And the minute your belief system is put on to me, then that's where the freedom ends. And what we see happening now with this nationalist culture and Christianity is that bleeding over, and we're seeing lots of legislation of morality based on a very narrow sect of Christianity.
Right, right. It does seem for all of the things that our government should be involved in, has to be involved in, is involved in, of running the business of our state, trying to, legislate morality should be a very low priority. But when you look at it as percentage of the volume of bills filed or the amount of time spent by the legislature and by all of us as a community trying to push back on this, it definitely feels like a disproportionate amount of energy is spent on the morality stuff.
Well, and think about the tax dollars that have gone to the lawsuits that come as a result of what I believe is pandering.
Right. Well, Shannon, as we kind of wrap up for today, this has been great. Thank you. Please come back. I'm sure you and I can talk for hours about this. We'll do an episode about the Church of England sometime to really entertain our guests.
Yeah. I'll talk Tudors all day long.
Make sure Scott is here for that. He will love that. Coming up in a couple of weeks, the governor has his annual prayer breakfast that he does every year. And OFN is hosting kind of a companion event that is separate.
I love how you put that, a companion event. Yes, and it's not just OFN. We are doing this in a collaborative of a great many number of organizations. So it's not just our event. It belongs to a whole host of organizations. You can see the logo on our website at okfaith.org/lunch. So on February 20th, we are co-hosting the Interfaith Impact Lunch, and it will consist of prayers from interfaith leaders. It will consist of a panel discussion about the separation of church and state, why it's important, why we need to care about it, especially at this point in our history. And then we're going to have opportunity for some collective action around the issue. So it's going to be a great event. Heads up, though, almost half the room is filled.
Oh.
So tickets are only $10, and the proceeds are going to the Regional Food Bank of Oklahoma. So it's a cheap lunch. You can't get lunch for $10 very many places.
Very exciting. I'm going to register right now.
You better register now.
Since we're a co-host, I probably should do it.
Yes. Let's Fix This as a co-host. It's February 20th, 11:30 to 1 p.m. at the First Americans Museum.
That'll be so exciting. That's a Tuesday.
It's a Tuesday.
That'll be excellent. So okfaith.org/lunch. I like it. I love a simple URL like that.
Gotta have a simple URL.
Yeah, that's it. You can go to letsfixthis.org/vote for the same reason, right?
That's right.
That's it.
Come have lunch with us.
Yes.
Come have lunch. Let's talk some more about this issue.
Yeah, you should. That's a heck of a price. $10 if you want to come. $25 if you want to sponsor somebody else. Even nicer. That helps. And again, all the proceeds go to the Regional Food Bank.
That's right.
You can't argue with this.
Absolutely not.
Win-win-win.
Win-win-win.
Reverend Dr. Shannon Fleck, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks, Andy.
Listeners, thank you for being here as well. Next week, we'll be joined by Dr. James Davenport, who I think is the chair of the Political Science Department in Rose State College. We'll be talking about his life, his experience out there in education, and we'll be talking about the governor's State of the State address, which will be delivered next Monday. That'll be a hoot. Dr. Davenport, I believe, is a libertarian. I am not. I can't wait to hear his take on this and more. So, listeners, thanks for being here. And remember, decisions are made by those who show up. See you next week.